Hi, women of welcome. Oh my goodness. What is this filter situation? My goodness. Don't even know. Oh well. Hi. Bree Stenford here. I'm coming on to just touch base with you ladies because we have had some questions that I'm going to ask, or that I'm going to answer, that you asked about our While in Our Care videos. So I'm going to answer just 3 questions pretty briefly. And hopefully that'll be helpful when talking about these While in Our Care videos. I know they're hard to watch. If you've watched even one of them, I've gotten messages from some of you who are just like, I can't even get through one. I know. They're so... It takes courage to watch them, but I just feel so strongly that that's what we're supposed to do. We're just supposed to enter into the hard spaces and honor these kids by listening to their stories. And if it takes you a while to get through them, I get it. It's taken me several months to just recover from having to be so in depth with them. So I'm with you and I get it. So I'm going to answer 3 questions about these videos that you all have been asking. And one is, how do we know that these stories from these kids are true? They seem pretty dramatic. They seem pretty horrific. And yes, they are. But this is what we know, that a group of immigration lawyers were doing some routine checks. Is my chair up? Doing some routine checks in immigration facilities along the border as part of some accountability measures set in place by the Flores Settlement Agreement, making sure that the government is adhering to the Flores Settlement Agreement, which, if you don't remember, the Flores Settlement Agreement is a nationwide set of standards and policies about detention and treatment of migrant children that are held in the care of the U.S. government, which really prioritizes their release into the most non-restrictive settings possible, and also put them in place or in custody of sponsor families or next of kin as quickly as possible. So these immigration lawyers were doing routine checks that they usually do at random at different detention centers along the border in fulfillment of the Flores Settlement Agreement. And so they were doing that. They were going in and they were randomly picking children out of holding centers and spaces and asking questions about their experience. When did you arrive? What have you eaten? Have you showered? Do you know where your parents are? Did you arrive with someone? Just some normal basic questions of children who are being held in these facilities. And so these immigration lawyers were doing that. And these stories are some of hundreds. So we read and recorded only 8 of hundreds of stories that were sworn testimonies of children that were being held in these centers in 2018 and 2019. So their declarations were and are filed in a lawsuit against the U.S. government about the kind of treatment these kids were receiving while in our care. And they were collected by these immigration lawyers from different universities and institutions. And really what ended up happening is these lawyers going and doing these routine checks were understanding how egregious the treatment, how horrific the treatment was of these kids, that they decided to break their confidentiality agreements and take these stories to the press because things were so bad. And so that's why when you hear in the stories, the names of the children are redacted because for confidentiality's sake and safety reasons and whatnot. So all of the children are sworn under penalty of perjury that their declarations are true and complete to the best of their abilities. When you listen to the ages of some of the children, I'm not sure what a 5-year-old, would think that they would benefit out of telling another random stranger what they ate that day or when they arrived or who they're supposed to be connecting with. They had been surrounded by adults who hadn't seemed to necessarily care much about their treatment or their needs, and to just talk with another random adult, I'm not sure if a 5, 6, 8-year-old could really determine that a false story and manipulation about basic hygiene questions could really get anywhere with the U.S. government. So this is, we have faith in these lawyers who had been doing these routine checks. I've actually been in conversation with some of them who are Christian women who are these immigration lawyers, and we're going in and doing these interviews. So hopefully we'll be able to have at least one of them on a live with us to be able to talk about that and what their experience was. So we're working on that for y'all. But this is how and why we believe these stories to be true, as hard as they are. The second question that we have gotten is how was this treatment allowed to happen? And many of these stories are from children who were separated from their parents during the implementation of the zero tolerance policy back in the summer of 2018. So essentially, parents who were crossing the border with their children were criminally prosecuted under zero tolerance, which is not the normal process. Normally that would be a minor offense, and instead they were being criminally prosecuted for crossing the border. So if you're seeking, it's kind of a weird thing to try and understand, but if you're crossing the border, you're crossing the border illegally to legally present to a Border Patrol agent and ask to seek asylum. So you can legally cross a border illegally to seek asylum. So what they were doing is they were saying if you were crossing the border illegally, even if you were seeking asylum, you were going to be criminally prosecuted. And what that did is if you were committing a criminal offense, you would be separated and sent to adult detention facilities, which would separate you from your children if you came with any, because children aren't allowed in adult detention facilities, and therefore that policy was separating children from their parents. And so while this separation was happening, the Trump administration did not put in place a system of tracking the separations or making plans for eventual reunification. So the policy in and of itself was actually put up and then put in place. We know this from White House briefing documents that have been in the news, that this was actually set up as a deterrent policy, and it ended up not deterring. We know from the data once the policy was reversed that it actually didn't deter the numbers from people coming and migrating. Cruelty is not going to deter people who are fleeing cruelty, and we also don't necessarily know that people were aware that this cruel treatment was happening back in Central America. I mean, Americans themselves didn't even know this treatment was happening. So the policy really was a complete failure of planning, and it had a blatant disregard for vulnerable kids and families that were arriving at the border and what this separation would do to them. So the separation of these families and the influx of families and making adults be criminally charged and prosecuted allowed that to happen, and it led to the horrific conditions that you see and you hear about in these children's testimonies. I would also just very humbly and boldly say that it was allowed to happen because Americans didn't want to believe it was true. People were raising the flag. People were saying things back in 2017, and I think that it seemed pretty unbelievable that our government would be separating kids from their parents. And then when these stories broke, it was just an undeniable thing that was going on. And so it wasn't just Christians, but there were a lot of Christians who stood up and said, absolutely not. I mean, we might be partisan in nature and we might be Republicans, but we're not in agreement with this Republican-led policy. Or you had other folks on the other side of the fence who just said, no matter what you think, this is not okay. So I think it was a mix, right? This was allowed to happen because of the policies that were set in place, and it was also allowed to happen because we didn't hold our government accountable when we heard of red flags that were happening. So the next very natural question that's been asked a lot, and I know Sarah has addressed this in other videos, is what can I do? And I just want to remind you of the power of your voice. And I know that seems kind of silly and flippant to say, but it actually really works. And what I mean by that is about a year ago, we realized that the TVPRA, and for those of you who need to know what TVPRA is, it's the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. And that is an act that helps protect vulnerable children from trafficking. We realized that act was not being followed to the fullest extent. And so we partnered with child trafficking, human trafficking organizations, and we sent a letter with all of you to someone who we knew had the ear of the current president. We had over 25,000 of you that had signed a letter, and we knew that someone who was influential and who had his ear was Ivanka Trump. And so we sent 25,000 signatures in a letter to her voicing our concerns about migrant children and TVPRA not being followed to the fullest extent. And what all of our collective voices did together is it got us a call with the White House. We were on a call with Ivanka Trump's senior advisory staff. We got to express our concerns. We got to talk with them. And a lot of our advocacy work with you all, in partnership with you, your name, your voice, your calls, your emails, your signing of the petitions, has earned us a seat at the table, has earned us a call, has earned us a relationship. And so that's not us, that's all of us together. What I mean by us, it's not by Women of Welcome, it's by all of us together. So there is a letter. If you went to womenofwelcome.com, the link is in our bio, /while in our care. There's a letter that we want to send in the same spirit to someone who we know has this current president's ear and has influence, and that's Dr. Jill Biden. And she has been a child advocate and worked with children her entire life. And so we have a letter to her asking her to influence at the highest levels this kind of treatment of children never happens again, and that the reunification of families with their children that have been separated is prioritized. We know that the Family Reunification Task Force has been busy trying to reunify families where they have very little information to do so. We actually were on a call with them a couple weeks ago, asking them how their progress was going, letting them know that we were available and ready to listen to some of their challenges and to help them along. So again, all of us together are entering into this space of trying to hold people accountable, and then also trying to create change where these kind of horrific things won't happen again. So those were the questions I promised I would answer, and I told you I was going to keep it brief. The other thing I'll just let you know about is there's some great news happening in immigration lately, and I'll be kind of putting some stuff in some stories this week about that, but we still need you to be calling Governor Abbott's office. And if you're wondering why, we have a video that we put up last week. I think it's about 6 minutes long about why we need you to call Governor Abbott. And I think that's in last week's video, so you can do that. And also be looking for this. This is coming to our welcome shop near you. It says Choosing to Be Brave. And this is a beautiful, great summer tumbler for you to have your coffee in. It's 12 ounces. It'll be in the shop soon, so you can be looking for that. Your Choose to Be Brave Women of Welcome coffee tumbler. So, all right, ladies, it's always a pleasure being with you, and we'll talk with you soon.